"When I grow up, I'll marry you," said the little girl to the millionaire, who laughed. Years later, an 18-year-old woman kisses him out of the blue, and moments later he discovers something incredible. Comment with a score from 0 to 10 on my story. Your opinion is very important. And subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The frigid winter morning cut through the skin like icy razors as the 30-year-old widowed millionaire walked through the streets of the big city. His impeccable custom-tailored suit contrasted sharply with the grim backdrop of soot-covered buildings and cracked sidewalks. He had built his fortune investing in Wall Street stocks since his early 20s, amassing a wealth that included luxury condos, imported cars, and even a small stash of Bitcoin he kept as a future investment. That particular morning, his thoughts were consumed by an important meeting scheduled for 2 hours later. He needed to close a deal that would generate substantial dividends for his investment firm. He walked briskly, constantly checking the gold watch on his wrist, when his right foot tripped on something unexpected. A torn and soaked cardboard box lay in the middle of the sidewalk, victim to the previous night's rain. The impact was sudden, and he nearly lost his balance, grabbing a street sign to avoid falling. His first reaction was irritation. Who would leave trash scattered like that? But before he could move on, the box stirred. From within the precarious cardboard structure emerged a little girl of 4, looking more like 2 due to evident malnutrition. Her enormous eyes, disproportionate to her thin face, stared at the man with a disturbing intensity. Her brown hair was tangled and dirty, her clothes were rags that barely covered her frail body, and her bare feet were blue from the cold. The millionaire stood paralyzed for a few seconds, processing the surreal scene before him. A child, living in a cardboard box, alone, on the busy streets of downtown. His instincts told him to call the authorities, but something in the girl's determined gaze made him hesitate. "When I grow up, I'll marry you," she declared, with all the seriousness a 4-year-old could muster, as if making the most important statement of her life. The phrase caught him completely off guard. For a moment he didn't know how to react. Then a genuine laugh escaped his lips. The childlike innocence, the way she had uttered the words with such conviction, touched something in his heart that had long been dormant. "Is that so?" he asked, crouching down to her level. "And why do you want to marry me?" "Because you have kind eyes," she replied without hesitation, "and because you tripped over my house without getting mad at me." The simplicity of the answer completely disarmed him. Here was a child who clearly had nothing, living in deplorable conditions, and yet managed to see kindness where many would only see inconvenience. The wealthy man felt something stir in his chest, an emotion he hadn't experienced since losing his wife 3 years prior. "What's your name, little one?" he asked, extending his hand to help her out of the box completely. "I don't have a real name. People call me different things," she replied, accepting his hand with surprising confidence. "But I like it when someone calls me something sweet." His heart ached, a 4-year-old who didn't even have a proper name. He looked around and realized that several people were passing by without even noticing the situation. The big city had made everyone insensitive to the suffering of others, including himself until that moment. "Are you hungry?" he asked, observing the girl's extreme thinness. She nodded timidly, as if admitting her hunger was an embarrassing confession. Her big eyes filled with hope as he stood up and extended his hand again. "Let's find you something to eat, and then we'll sort this out," he said, making a decision that would change both their lives forever. As they walked down the street, she held his hand tightly, as if afraid he would disappear at any moment. The contrast between them was stark, a man dressed in clothes that cost more than many people earned in a month, and a girl whose only possession was a tattered cardboard box. "Why were you living in a box?" he asked gently, as they entered a nearby diner. "I don't remember having a real home," she replied, her eyes lighting up at the sight of the food in the display case. "I've always lived on the street. Sometimes kind people gave me food, but no one ever stopped to really talk to me." The millionaire ordered a full breakfast for her and watched with a mixture of sadness and admiration as the girl ate every crumb with genuine gratitude. Between bites, she looked at him and smiled, as if wanting to make sure he was still there. "You said you're going to marry me when you grow up," he commented, trying to keep his tone light. "But that's going to take a long time." "That's okay," she replied with absolute conviction. "I'll wait. And I'll get really strong and smart to be a good wife to you." The determination in her voice surprised him. It wasn't just a passing childish fantasy. There was something in the way she spoke that demonstrated a deep resolution, almost too mature for her age. After breakfast, he took her to the nearest municipal shelter. During the car ride, she remained glued to the window, watching the city with endless curiosity, asking questions about everything she saw. Her natural intelligence was evident, despite her lack of formal education. When they arrived at the shelter, a clean but clearly overcrowded institution, the director greeted them with professionalism mixed with surprise. It wasn't common to see such a well-dressed man personally bringing in a street child. "She needs medical care, education, and a safe home," he explained to the director as the girl remained by his side, holding his hand. "You're not going to leave, are you?" she asked, looking at him with wide, fearful eyes. "I'll come back to visit you," he promised, crouching down once again. "And you're going to study and grow strong here, okay? And when I grow up, will you marry me?" she insisted. He laughed again, but this time there was a melancholy in his laughter. "When you grow up, you'll be able to choose to marry whoever you want." "I already chose," she replied with devastating simplicity. As he walked away from the shelter, he couldn't get the image of that determined girl waving to him from the window out of his mind. There was something about her that had touched him deeply, a life force that contrasted with his own empty and lonely existence. That night, alone in his luxurious apartment, he wondered if he had done the right thing. He had enough money to help, but would that be enough? And why did the child's words keep echoing in his mind like a promise that transcended logic? The following months became a routine that the millionaire never imagined having in his life. Every Saturday morning, he drove to the shelter to visit the girl he had rescued from the streets. She always waited for him at the second-floor window, waving vigorously as soon as she saw his imported black car parking in front of the building. "You came!" she would shout, running through the hallway, her footsteps echoing through the shelter's walls. In a few months, the transformation had been remarkable. Her hair now shone clean and well-groomed, her face had gained the rosy cheeks of a healthy child, and her big eyes no longer carried the deep sadness that had marked him on their first encounter. "Of course I came," he would respond every time, crouching down to receive the warm hug she always gave him. "I promised, didn't I?" The visits became the highlight of the week for both. He would take her for walks in the nearby park, where she ran freely through the grass, fed the ducks in the artificial lake, and always, invariably returned to the subject she considered most important in the world. "I've grown a little this week," she would announce, stretching to show her height. "See? Soon I can marry you." He smiled, but as time went on, he began to realize that this wasn't just a passing childish fantasy. There was something almost solemn in the way she treated the subject, as if it were a sacred commitment she had made to herself. The shelter director, an experienced woman of 50, approached him on a rainy autumn afternoon. "I need to talk to you about the girl," she said, leading him to her private office. "Is she all right?" he asked, concerned. "Physically, yes. But psychologically, she's developed an unhealthy fixation on you," explained the director, flipping through some papers on her desk. "She doesn't show interest in playing with other children. She doesn't want to participate in group activities. She spends the whole week drawing and writing about you, planning your future wedding." The millionaire felt a discomfort grow in his chest. "She'll outgrow it as she gets older, won't she?" "Maybe. Or maybe it will become something more problematic," replied the director frankly. "Abandoned children often develop intense attachments to figures who represent security. But in her case, there's something different. It's as if she has transformed you into the center of her entire world. That night, he returned home disturbed. He looked around his luxurious apartment, decorated with expensive furniture and works of art. He had bought more for status than for genuine appreciation. His life had become an empty routine since the loss of his wife. Work, investments, business meetings, and nothing else. The visits to the shelter were, ironically, the only moments in which he felt truly alive. The years passed like pages being turned. The girl grew, but her determination remained unwavering. At 7 years old, she learned to read and write and began to send him little letters during the week. The messages were simple but always ended the same way. With love, your future wife. At 10 years old, she had become one of the most intelligent children in the shelter. She voraciously read everything she could find, studied with a dedication that impressed the volunteer teachers, and developed skills that set her apart from the other children. But she remained socially isolated, refusing to form deep friendships. "Why don't you play with the other girls?" he asked one spring afternoon, watching her draw alone under a tree in the shelter's courtyard. "They don't understand," she replied without looking up from the paper. "They play house and pretend they have families. I don't need to pretend. I know exactly what my life is going to be like." "And what is it going to be like?" he asked, although he already knew the answer. "I'm going to study a lot. I'm going to become beautiful and intelligent, and when I turn 18, I'm going to marry you," she said with the same conviction she had shown since she was 4 years old. "Then we'll live in a big house, and I'll take care of you forever." The millionaire felt a strange tightening in his chest. The girl had created a detailed life plan based entirely on him, and as touching as her devotion was, he was beginning to question whether he had done the right thing by maintaining those regular visits. When she turned 12, he tried a different approach. "Have you ever thought about other possibilities for your future?" he asked delicately. "Maybe you want to be a doctor, a teacher, a lawyer." "I want to be a good wife," she replied without hesitation. "I can study those things too, of course, but my main job will be to take care of our family." "Our family," he repeated, surprised. "Yes, you, me, and the children we're going to have," she said naturally, as if she were discussing the weather. "I've already thought about names. If it's a boy, he can have your name. If it's a girl, I'd like to choose." The innocence with which she planned such a specific future left him simultaneously touched and alarmed. She had transformed that childhood promise into a true obsession, building her entire identity around the idea of becoming his wife. At 15, the transformation was even more remarkable. The thin, abandoned girl had become a beautiful teenager, with delicate features and an elegant posture that drew attention. Her intelligence had developed exponentially. She devoured books on philosophy, economics, and management, always explaining that she wanted to understand the business world so she could help him. "I read about stock investments today," she commented on one of his visits. "Are you familiar with the concept of risk versus return? I find it fascinating how you can transform capital into net worth through strategic decisions." He was impressed with her vocabulary and understanding of complex concepts. "Where did you learn those terms?" "At the library. I read every book I could find about the financial market," she replied proudly. "I want to understand how you built your fortune. When we're married, I can help with investment decisions." The naturalness with which she spoke about their future together continued to surprise him. It was as if, for her, there was no doubt about their destiny. At 16, she had become a stunning young woman. Other visitors to the shelter began to notice her beauty, and she received several offers of adoption from interested families. But she refused them all, always with the same explanation. She already had a family waiting for her. The shelter director, now concerned about the young woman's approaching adulthood, approached him again. "In 2 years, she's going to leave here," she said seriously. "You need to understand that she has built her entire emotional life around you. If you don't have serious intentions, you need to start to gradually distance yourself. Serious intentions? He repeated, confused. She's becoming a woman, and a very beautiful woman, explained the director. You can't keep visiting her as if she were a child forever. People are going to start asking questions, creating rumors. And she really believes you're going to get married. That night, he stayed awake late, looking out the window of his apartment. In 12 years of visits, he had watched the abandoned girl transform into a bright and determined young woman. But somewhere along the way, he had lost control of the situation. What began as a gesture of kindness had become something complex and confusing. His emotions had also changed over the years. What was initially paternal protection had evolved into something he couldn't clearly define: admiration, deep affection, or something more dangerous that he preferred not to name. When she turned 17, he made a decision he believed to be the most sensible. He reduced his visits to once a month, always accompanied by the shelter director, maintaining more formal conversations and avoiding moments of emotional intimacy. She noticed the change immediately. "You're distancing yourself from me," she confronted him one tense afternoon. "Why?" "You're growing up," he replied carefully. "It's natural for our relationship to change." "I don't want it to change," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "Not in a bad way. I want it to change because I'm finally old enough to be your real partner." The despair in her voice broke his heart, but he knew he needed to keep his distance. "You need to think about other possibilities for your life." "There are no other possibilities," she replied firmly. "Not for me. I chose you when I was 4 years old, and that choice has never changed. It never will." When he left the shelter that day, he didn't know it would be the last time he would see her before she turned 18. And he had no idea that, in a few months, she would take an action that would change everything between them in a way he could never have imagined. The day she turned 18 arrived on a sunny spring morning. The millionaire had deliberately avoided going to the shelter, trying to convince himself that it was better for both of them if he began to distance himself permanently. He spent the morning in his office downtown, reviewing investment contracts and trying to focus on the numbers that danced on his computer screens. His firm had grown considerably in recent years. His investments in international funds and euro bonds had yielded extraordinary profits, turning his wealth into something almost obscene. He had properties in 3 countries, a collection of cars he never drove, and a bank account that grew faster than he could spend. But none of that mattered at that moment. His thoughts were completely focused on the young woman who had just reached adulthood and who, most likely, was waiting for him at the shelter. Around 3 in the afternoon, his secretary knocked on his office door. "Sir, there's a young woman here who insists on speaking with you," she announced in an odd tone of voice. "She says it's a very important personal matter." Before he could respond, the door opened completely and she walked in. 18 years old, tall, elegant, with long, silky hair framing a face that had become genuinely beautiful. She wore a simple dress, but one that accentuated her slender figure, and carried a small suitcase in her hand. "Hi," she said with a smile that mixed shyness and determination. "Today's my birthday." He stood up from his chair, stunned to see her there, in his professional environment. "How did you get here? How did you know where my office is?" "It wasn't hard to find out," she replied, placing the suitcase on the floor. "You're a well-known person in the city, and I always knew your full name." The secretary remained at the door, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "Sir, I need him to sign these documents before 5. "Give me a few minutes," he said, gesturing for her to leave and close the door. When they were alone, a tense silence filled the luxurious office. She looked around, observing the mahogany bookcases, the expensive paintings on the walls, the panoramic view of the city through the enormous windows. "It's even more beautiful than I imagined," she commented. "You built all this yourself." "What are you doing here?" he asked, struggling to keep his voice controlled. "I left the shelter this morning," she replied calmly. Officially, I'm now an independent adult, and I came to fulfill the promise I made when I was 4 years old. Before he could react, she approached him, placed her hands on his face, and kissed him. It wasn't the innocent kiss of a child, but the passionate kiss of a woman who knew exactly what she wanted. Her lips were soft and warm, and for a terrible and wonderful moment, he allowed himself to reciprocate. When they broke apart, she looked at him with eyes shining with happiness and triumph. "Done," she said. "Now we're officially a couple." "This is crazy," he murmured, running his hands over his face. "You can't just show up here and—" "Why not?" she interrupted. "I warned you. For 14 years I warned you that this day would come. Did you think I was joking?" He walked to the window, trying to organize his thoughts. "You need to understand that this isn't a fairy tale. I'm 34 years old, you're 18. People aren't going to understand." "I don't care about people," she replied firmly. "I only care about you. And I know you feel something for me too, otherwise you wouldn't have kept visiting me all these years." The painful truth of her words hit him like a punch to the gut. At some point over the years, his feelings had become confused and complicated. Admiration had turned into affection. Affection had grown into something he refused to admit, even to himself. "Where are you going to live?" he asked, changing the subject. "I thought we could live together," she replied naturally. "After all, we're practically married now." "We're not married. Not practically, not in any way," he said more harshly than he intended. Her face saddened for the first time. "Are you rejecting my proposal?" "I'm being realistic. You need to study, work, discover who you are as an independent person," he explained. "You can't just jump from childhood to marriage without living your own life." "I already know who I am," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm the woman who loves you and who will love you forever." At that moment, the secretary knocked on the door again. "Sir, I'm sorry to interrupt, but the shelter director is on the line. She says it's urgent." He answered the phone with trembling hands. "Hello?" "She ran away," said the director's agitated voice. "She left early this morning without telling anyone. She only left a note saying she had gone to fulfill a promise." "Do you know where she is?" He looked at the young woman who was watching him intently. "Yes, I know. She's with me." "Thank God. Can you bring her back?" "Legally, she can leave whenever she wants, but I'm worried. She has nowhere to go, no money, no life experience." "I'll take care of it," he said, hanging up the phone. "I'm not going back," she declared immediately. "No matter what you say, that part of my life is over." "Then what do you intend to do? Live on the street?" "If I have to," she replied, with the same determination she had shown since childhood. "But I'd rather stay with you." He ran his hands through his hair, feeling the weight of the responsibility he had carried for the past 14 years intensify overwhelmingly. "This can't happen. Not like this." "Then how?" she asked, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "Do you want me to wait even longer? Another 5 years? Another 10? How long are you going to keep pretending you don't feel anything for me?" The question echoed through the office like a gunshot. He knew she was right. There was something between them, something that had grown over the years and that he had tried desperately to ignore. But acknowledging that would mean admitting that he had fallen in love with a girl he met when she was 4 years old, and that made him feel like a monster. "I need time to think," he said finally. "How much time?" she asked, wiping away her tears with the back of her hand. "I don't know, a few weeks, maybe months." "And in the meantime, what do I do?" "Go back to the shelter and pretend this never happened." "I'll rent an apartment for you," he offered. "Small but decent. You can settle in, look for a job, start building your life." "Alone," she added bitterly. "For now, alone." She picked up her suitcase from the floor and walked to the door. Before leaving, she turned to him one last time. "You can try to run from what you feel," she said. "You can try to rationalize. You can try to turn this into a matter of morality or social convenience. But you can't change the fact that for the past 14 years, we've both built our lives around each other. and you can't change the fact that you love me as much as I love you." After she left, he remained alone in the office for hours, looking at the city through the window. Night had fallen. The lights of the buildings created a sea of bright dots, and he felt lost in the middle of it all. He kept his promise. He rented a small but comfortable apartment in a safe area of the city, furnished it with the essentials, and left enough money for her to support herself for a few months. But he didn't visit her. He didn't have the courage. The weeks turned into months. He tried to immerse himself in work, closed multi-million-dollar deals, expanded his investments to international markets, but nothing could take the image of her leaving his office that day out of his mind. It was through acquaintances that he learned she had gotten a job at a bookstore near her apartment. She worked part-time and studied at night, determined to get into a university. Always focused, always disciplined, always with a clear plan for the future. A plan that still included him. 3 months after the kiss in the office, he received a call that would change everything once again. It was the public hospital on the outskirts of the city. There had been an accident, and she was hospitalized in serious condition. As he was the only person listed as an emergency contact in her documents, they needed him to go there immediately. When he arrived at the hospital, he discovered the devastating truth she had hidden from him during all those months of silence. She wasn't just injured, she was pregnant, and the accident had cost her much more than he could have imagined. The hospital hallway smelled of disinfectant and despair. The millionaire walked quickly along the pale green walls, following the confused instructions he had received over the phone. When he finally found her room, he stopped at the door, mentally preparing himself for what he might find. She was lying on the hospital bed, as pale as the sheets that covered her. Her eyes, once always bright with determination, now seemed empty, lost somewhere distant that he couldn't reach. A nurse checked her vital signs with mechanical and efficient movements. "How is she?" he asked, his voice coming out weaker than he would have liked. "Physically, she will recover," replied the nurse without looking at him. "Some fractured ribs, severe contusions, but nothing that won't heal with time. The problem is, well, the doctor will explain better." When they were alone, he approached the bed hesitantly. "Hi," he said, as he had done hundreds of times over the years. She turned her face in his direction, and for the first time since he had known her, she didn't smile when she saw him. "You came," she murmured. "Of course I came. The hospital called me," he explained, pulling a chair close to the bed. "What happened?" "Car accident," she replied mechanically. "I was crossing the street. A drunk driver didn't see me." He observed the purple marks on her face, the way she avoided moving too much, and felt a sudden and uncontrollable rage against the unknown person who had caused it. "Are you in pain?" "Not anymore," she said, and there was something in the way she pronounced those words that made him realize that she wasn't just talking about physical pain. The doctor arrived a few minutes later, a middle-aged man with a tired expression and gentle eyes. He asked to speak with him in the hallway, away from her. "Are you a relative?" asked the doctor. "I'm a family friend," he lied. "She was pregnant," said the doctor directly, without beating around the bush. "About 3 months. The impact was very severe. We couldn't save the baby." The words hit the millionaire like punches to the gut. Pregnant by another man. During all those months in which she had claimed to love him exclusively, she had become involved with someone else. "Does she know?" he asked. "We told her yesterday when she woke up. It was difficult," replied the doctor. "She went into severe emotional shock. She hasn't said anything since then. She just cried for hours." "You were the first person she asked to see." When he returned to the room, she was looking at the ceiling with eyes full of tears that refused to fall. "You already know, don't you?" she asked without looking at him. He nodded, not trusting his own voice. "I was running away from you when it happened," she confessed, still staring at the ceiling. "I had just found out about the baby and was running away, trying to think about how I was going to tell you that I had ruined everything." Ruined what? He asked, confused. Our story. Our future. Everything I had promised, she replied, finally looking at him. You were always the only man I truly loved, but you distanced yourself from me, and I felt so alone, so rejected. You got involved with someone else, he completed, trying not to show the pain he felt. It was just one night. I was drunk, I was sad, I was trying to forget you, she explained, the words tumbling over each other. It was a co-worker, someone who showed interest in me when you ignored me. I thought that maybe I could learn to love someone else, that maybe it would be better for all of us. The brutal honesty of her words cut his heart. And you found out you were pregnant. And I realized I had made the biggest mistake of my life, she continued. Because even being with another man, even carrying another person's child, I could still only think about you. I could still only love you. They remained in silence for long minutes, the weight of the revelations hanging over them like a dark cloud. The millionaire processed everything he had heard, fighting against contradictory emotions, pain, jealousy, guilt, and something that might have been relief. What are you going to do now? He asked finally. I don't know, she replied in a broken voice. For the first time in my life, I don't have a plan. I'm not sure about anything anymore. You can go back to the apartment I rented. You can recover. Go back to work. Without you? She asked, turning to face him directly. Do you want me to keep living as if you don't exist? As if the last 14 years didn't happen? He didn't know what to answer. During the months of separation, he had tried to convince himself that it was better for both of them if they followed different paths. But seeing her there, broken and vulnerable, brought to the surface all the feelings he had tried to bury. I love you, she said suddenly. I know you think it's sick. I know you think it's just the obsession of an orphaned girl who fixated on the first person who was kind to her. But you're wrong. How can you be sure? He asked. Because even after everything that's happened, after I betrayed our story, after I lost the baby, after I disappointed you and myself, I still choose you, she replied with a strength he didn't expect. Even knowing that you might reject me again, even knowing that it might be easier to move on alone, I still choose to fight for us. The force of her determination, even in the most fragile moment of her life, touched him deeply. It was the same brave girl who had declared her love in a cardboard box, only now she was a woman who understood the real weight of her choices. I need time, he said, echoing the same words he had used months before. How much time? She asked, and he realized it was almost the same conversation they had had in his office. I don't know, but this time I promise I'll really think about it. I'm not just going to run away. She nodded slowly. And I promise I won't make any more decisions alone that affect both of us. If you give me a chance, we'll build this together, or we won't build anything at all. During the following weeks, he visited the hospital every day. They talked about simple things, the books she was reading, the changes in his firm, memories of the years at the shelter. Gradually he began to see in her not only the abandoned girl he had rescued, nor the obsessive teenager who planned a fantastical future, but a real woman with flaws and fears, who had grown and matured through pain. When she was finally discharged, 8 months later, they had rebuilt a connection based on honesty and mutual respect. It was no longer the dynamic of protector and protected, nor of responsible adult and dependent child. It was something new, something neither of them had experienced before. Do you want to work for me? He offered on the day she left the hospital. For real this time, as an employee with a fair salary, real responsibilities. In what area? She asked, intrigued. Investment analysis. You've always shown an interest in the financial market. I can teach you what you need to know about funds, stocks, investments in gold, and cryptocurrency. She smiled for the first time in months. You'd hire me even after everything that's happened. "I'm hiring you because of everything that's happened," he corrected. "You've shown that you're strong enough to survive the worst situations and honest enough to admit your mistakes. Those are qualities I value as much in an employee as in a person." The 2 years that followed were a period of mutual discovery. She became a brilliant analyst, capable of identifying investment opportunities that significantly increased the firm's profitability. He learned to see her as an intellectual partner, someone whose opinions he respected and whose decisions he trusted. Slowly, very slowly, something romantic and genuine began to blossom between them. It wasn't based on the childish fantasy of a fairy tale, nor on the distorted gratitude of an orphan for her savior. It was based on shared experiences, mutual respect, and the gradual discovery that they were compatible not only emotionally, but intellectually and as people. When she turned 20, on a warm summer night, they were working late at the office, analyzing a complex investment in international assets. Suddenly, she stopped talking and stared at him. "What is it?" he asked. "Do you remember the promise I made when I was 4 years old?" she asked. "I remember. I still keep that promise," she said, "but now for completely different reasons than I had back then." He got up from the table and approached her. "What reasons?" "Because you're the most honest man I know. Because you respect my choices even when you disagree with them. Because you see me as a complete person, not as a charity project or a romantic fantasy," she replied, getting up too. "And because, after everything we've been through, after all the mistakes and successes, I still choose you. And this time, I know you choose me too." He smiled, finally free from the guilt and doubts he had carried for so long. "Yes," he said simply, "I choose you too." The kiss they shared that night was different from all the others. It wasn't impulsive like the first, nor desperate like the subsequent ones. It was the kiss of two adults who had found in each other not only love, but also respect, partnership, and the promise of a future built together, with equality and honesty. 6 months later, they were married in a simple ceremony, surrounded only by a few close people, including the director of the former shelter, who cried throughout the entire ceremony. The abandoned 4-year-old girl had finally fulfilled her promise, but in a much more beautiful and real way than any fairy tale could have imagined.